and welcome back to this I-24 News Evening Edition. I'm David Matlin, and this is the Daily Debate. Well, Iran and the world powers known as the P5+1 resumed talks in Geneva yesterday amid high hopes that a diplomatic solution over Iran's nuclear program may finally be within reach. Well, the UK, US, France, Russia, China, and Germany, together with Iran, seem to be close to reaching a deal. However, there still remains many core issues which need to be resolved. Well, joining me tonight is Avi Melamed, independent Middle Eastern intelligence analyst, and Meir Javedanfar, Iranian political lecturer at the IDC Herzliya. Well, thank you both for joining us again in the studio. It's a topic we've been discussing now for some time. Seems the discussions will continue to go on. In terms of what's happening in Geneva today, I'll start with you, Mr. Melamed. How close is a deal, in your opinion? From what you've heard, from what's going on here, what's been released at least, how close is the deal?
I don't know. I don't think nobody knows, really. I mean, there is a lot of disinformation going on. There is a lot of PR. There is a lot of rumors and all kind of information coming in. I think that one of the things that we could say for sure is that we could see how the Iranians are doing one of the things they are excelling, and that is the whole art of negotiating. And this is something that you could easily track.
It's a new chapter for Iranian diplomacy, definitely.
Yeah, but they are using the old tactics of like the old bazaar, sort of speaking, negotiation tactics, which they excel in, and it seems like they're doing it quite efficiently. At least this is my impression.
Just to buy time right now?
I think they are just basically trying to improve their position all the time. They are known to be great negotiators, and everybody's talking about the famous bazaar in Iran. It's very obvious that the Iranian regime knows how to navigate its way through this bazaar.
Well, Mr. Javedanfar, do you agree with this or not agree? What's your position?
I think in terms of bazaar, to learn how to trade in a bazaar, the Iranians can learn a thing or two from the Israelis if they ever come to Shuka Carmel. If the Iranians ever see how the negotiations in this country, when there is the government coalitions being formed, and how parts of the chunks of the budget are given, in this horse trading, I actually disagree with this thing that the Iranians are great traders and great negotiators. If the Iranian regime, maybe in Tel Aviv, the Iranian businessmen may be good, but the Iranian regime for the past 8 years has had one of the worst negotiators. Look at how isolated the Iran is. Look at how they have managed to ruin the nuclear program. It's basically a white elephant project. The government owes $200 billion to its banks and contractors for, let's just say, 185 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium. You're talking about perhaps $500 million per kilo. That doesn't sound like very good negotiating people to me. They've got the stigma in Israel, but in reality, the Iranian regime is not. I think they are very worried, but they are trying not to show weakness in the negotiations, which is, and everybody does that.
Do you believe they genuinely want to seek a deal here, reach a deal, or is this just a stall tactic?
I think not. I think they do. It's because when they look at the Excel spreadsheet and they look at the numbers, there's a lot of red there.
Would either of you disagree with the notion that the sanctions are what brought Iran to the table right now?
No.
I think that the sanctions works. I mean, to a large extent, it does bring Iran to the table, but unlike what Meir said before, I think that in the end of the day, when you look the way the Iranians are conducting the negotiation, they basically already have some couple of substantial achievements. First and foremost, they are sitting together with the world-leading powers, and they are basically negotiating eye to eye, which is already a strength or a position of a strength. So I think that, yes, obviously they are under a lot of pressure, and that's the reason why they are negotiating. But I don't think it will be totally accurate to overrule the achievements that they have got so far.
Achievements in their nuclear program you're referring to, or in terms of their diplomacy?
More than the nuclear program. They basically seek all the time to be in a position that they will be fixed in the mindset, sort of speaking, as a regional superpower, and so far they aren't doing that. I mean, if you look at their involvement in the war in Syria and their demand to be part of the Geneva Talks, the fact that they are today sitting together eye to eye with the leading forces in the world, and they are basically negotiating for more or less an equal position.
Equal position. Iran's economy is on the brink of collapse. America's economy is growing. The European economy is growing. How can it be? I actually think Iran is very much, in terms of its economic power, in terms of its military power, it's one of its weakest points. And I actually think that Iran has never ever been weaker in the Middle East. They have to spend billions of dollars of their hard-earned money to maintain their influence in Syria. Their support for Hezbollah now is basically being seen, whereas before they were seen as defending the Arab pride against Israel and resistance, now they're basically seen as being backers of the butcher of Damascus. They're being seen as one of the biggest killers of Sunnis in the region. Turkey has turned against them. The Saudis are paying more than ever before for forces against Iran. How is Iran exactly a threat in terms of dominating the Middle East when the regime is every year losing its power? You know, Ayatollah Sistani, the leading authority on Shiism, is actually more qualified than Ayatollah Khamenei, recently said that Maliki should step down, and Maliki is the ally of Iran. I think the Iranians are not sitting as equal. They are very weak. And this is why they are there. And in this region, I'm not worried about an Iranian domination.
That's exactly strengthened what I'm saying, because I agree with you. They are in a lot of problems. They are facing a lot of challenges. Yet the fact is that today they are negotiating, and they are basically sitting around the table with all the challenges they have. They are sitting around the table, and they are being treated as an equal partner or counterpart to discuss, that is exactly the whole point.
Why did they come to the table?
They come to the table because they have interests. The Iranian regime is a dangerous one. It's a radical one. But it's not lunatic. It's not a lunatic regime. He knows how to operate proxies, the Hezbollah, the Shiite militias, and so forth and so forth. The point is that, again, and I agree with you, they are in a lot of stress, but the fact is that today they are negotiating from a position of strength with the Western powers. And again, you have mentioned the fact that they are sinking in the war in Syria, which is to a large extent quite accurate, yet in the same time they are also being considered by at least some of the leading powers in the world, like Russia, for example, as a legitimate counterpart to sit and to talk with in the Geneva conference. So this is one of the masterpieces of the Iranian work, because they know how to elevate, how to use, even in times of weakness as they are right now, how to maneuver and to play in a way that basically will bring them to the table, and they will perceive as if they are in a powerful position. This is an art.
I think the fact that they've turned up to the table is because of their weakness. For many years they said no because they thought they can continue with the resistance theme of Ayatollah Khamenei, which is why he's lashing out against Israel recently, by the way. For many years, Ayatollah Khamenei has been saying we should continue with the resistance. The West will capitulate and will accept us, will accept our position. We don't need to negotiate, which is why Saeed Jalili just turned up to negotiations, repeating the same lines over and over again. But now he's got to drink the chalice of poison, which is very bitter, and it's making him lash out. And again, I have to disagree with you here that I think it's because the regime is feeling weakness. Yes, turning up at the table is not a position of strength. They have to ask, why is it that they're coming to the table? It's because Khamenei's nuclear strategy has failed.
We don't say different things about it. We both agree that they are coming to the table from a weakness position. What I'm saying is that it's amazing to see how they are able yet from that weakened position to negotiate, to maneuver, to try to leverage and to elevate their situation. I think that's an art.
We'll shift our perspective for a minute to the Western position in this whole debate here. Some comments recently from John Kerry have seemed as if the optimism's been gone now, evaporated from this process, as well as the West seems to be ignoring this virulent speech that the Ayatollah delivered, I think it was 2 days ago now, in front of massive crowds chanting death to America, death to Israel. How do negotiations even proceed in this kind of a circumstance? How are they ignoring this tone coming from the regime still?
It seems like some factors in the West, and mostly the American administration, is almost eager to sign a deal. And it seems like, the American administration, the current administration, is being criticized for, in different parts of the Middle East, is being perceived like a lack of cohesive, decisive policy as far as comes to the American administration.
Their position at the table here?
I think that the American behavior is being translated by the counterpart, in our case the Iranian regime, as a weakness. I think it's not a big secret to say that today we know that some of major allies of the United States in the region, for example Saudi Arabia, are very not happy with what they perceive to be the indecisive, weak lack of leadership of the current American administration.
could be argued for foreign policy in general right now from this administration in the White House. Do you agree with that sentiment that the U.S. is, or the West, I guess we're speaking about in general, has weakened their position by seeming eager at the negotiating table here?
I don't agree, because I don't think the West is eager. I think the West has stated its position since the beginning that it's incumbent upon Iran to agree to suspend uranium enrichment at 20%. It's incumbent upon Iran to answer IAEA questions, and they've formed this great consensus amongst the P5+1. We have to remember, Obama, unlike Bush, was successful in bringing China and Russia on board. This is something that really worries the Iranians. When Rouhani was the head of the Supreme National Security Council in 2003, he says during his election campaign, I managed to create division between the Europeans and the Americans. The Europeans told me, don't worry, we'll make sure the Americans don't impose any sanctions against you. Look at it now. You have China and Russia sitting alongside the United States and the EU3 negotiating against Iran. And I think this, it may not seem much to us, but to Khamenei and what he's been saying for the last 3 or 4 years, the fact that they have to make these sacrifices at these talks at the interim level, this is something very major for the regime. And I think they're worried because now they're showing weakness. To us, it may not be much, but for them, they are the ones who are climbing down the tree, not the West. And this is something that the regime is worried that could be translated as a sign of weakness.
Yet we have to remember that only last week they were on the verge of signing a contract or a deal, and the Iranians were clearly very happy with that deal. The fact that the last moment the French president was basically weighing in and basically stopping the conclusion of the deal was very, very disappointing for the Iranians. It says a lot about what they see and how they perceive the Western position.
It goes to show that the West is united, because at the end the Americans and the Russians and everybody else fell behind the French position. And I have to say, I actually support the French position on this. Absolutely, they were right to demand that Iraq is stopped. But I actually think you have to also be, if that hadn't been the case, I don't think that would have meant Iran would have made a dash for the bomb. It would have been bad, but it wouldn't have been terrible. Because what the West was saying is that, look, what we're worried about is that the heavy water that you put in the IR-40 reactor, once you use it as fuel, then you can extract plutonium, okay? The French said that Iran should stop building that reactor, full stop. What the Americans were saying is that Iran should not load any fuel into that reactor, meaning there wouldn't be any wastage that you could turn into bomb. Of course, one is closer than the other. But if the Americans had gone ahead, it wouldn't have been a good deal, but it wouldn't have been a terrible deal. And again, I have to emphasize from the Iranian point of view, what they're disappointed to see is that there wasn't a rupture in the P5+1. They still turn up this time together as one, and they're negotiating against Iran.
Definitely an important factor here for these negotiations. Well, perhaps we're running out of some time here. We'll close on this. There's a third player at work here right now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been basically on the war path here, promoting the hard line against Iran, against any kind of deal here. What do you make of Netanyahu's position on this? He's drawn basically the hardest line possible. The Holocaust equals Iran with nuclear weapons. How's that perceived by you?
Well, it's very natural, I think. This is the one major card Netanyahu can play with, because Netanyahu basically, by reminding the world about potentially, allegedly, an Israeli ability to strike the Iranian nuclear facilities, basically creates a kind of like unclear segment within the equation, and the West, which is basically is negotiating with the Iranians, has to take into consideration, because they are not very sure whether this Israeli threat is for real or not. Netanyahu, as far as he's concerned, is basically using the one only card that he has sitting around this poker table, and he has to use this card. And if you noticed, in the last couple of days, there were a couple of very interesting announcements made by senior Israeli officials coming from mostly the security and intelligence establishment, basically saying quite openly that Israel has the ability to attack the Iranian nuclear facilities, which is part of this card Netanyahu is playing with, because it's the only thing that he can do.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time for this debate. Thank you, both gentlemen here, for being here today and contributing to this debate. Well, that does wrap up our daily debate segment here at the Evening Edition. Stay tuned for the headlines. After that, the one-on-one.